The drive back from Leavenworth takes about 4 hours depending on traffic through Kansas City. I'd done it 11 times in 3 years. Knew every rest stop, every mile marker where the radio signal dropped out, every diner with decent coffee between the prison and the small town in southern Missouri where my son and I used to live. I had the route memorized, the way you memorize things you'd rather forget. This time was different. My release date was supposed to be March 14th. It was January 29th. The warden called it early release for good behavior and overcrowding, handed me a manila envelope with my wallet, my watch, and $40 in gate money. Told me not to come back. I didn't call ahead, partly because I wanted to surprise Marcus. He'd just turned 11 in November, and I'd missed it, same as I'd missed his 9th and 10th. Partly because I didn't trust myself to hear his voice, and then have to wait 4 more hours. Mostly because something in me needed to see the house first, before anyone had time to prepare. My brother-in-law Greg picked me up at the gate. He'd offered every time, and this was the first time I'd said yes. He was quiet on the way out of the parking lot, which wasn't like Greg. Greg had opinions about everything: football, the price of lumber, whatever the governor had done wrong that week. An hour of silence from Greg meant something. "You okay?" I asked him. He kept his eyes on the highway. "Marcus is fine. I want you to know that first." My stomach went cold. What does that mean? It means he's physically fine. It means I should have called you sooner and I didn't, and I'm sorry. Greg, where is my son? He exhaled through his nose. "You know how Diane got involved with that Cornerstone group last spring. Diane was Marcus's mother. We'd been divorced for 4 years, separated for 5. She'd had Marcus while I was still working construction, before the incident that put me in Leavenworth. We'd shared custody, or we had until I wasn't in a position to share anything. I'd heard about Cornerstone in her letters, a community group she'd written, really helping me get centered. Marcus loves the kids there. They do weekend retreats, service projects. It's been good for both of us." Greg's jaw was tight. "Last month she sent him to their residential program, out in Benton County. Called it a Youth Leadership Academy. How long has he been there? 7 weeks. 7 weeks. Marcus had been somewhere for 7 weeks, and I was just now hearing about it. I tried to call you," Greg said. "The prison said you weren't accepting calls from non-family. Diane's the listed guardian. I didn't have legal standing to do anything, and she kept telling me it was fine, that Marcus was thriving." His voice went flat on that word, thriving, like he'd heard it so many times it had stopped meaning anything. "Give me the address." Benton County is the kind of place that looks peaceful from the highway. Rolling hills, old farmland, the kind of late January gray that makes everything look like a photograph someone forgot to develop. We turned off the state highway onto a county road I'd never heard of, then onto a gravel stretch that wasn't on the GPS. Greg had written the address on a piece of paper because the last time he tried to find it, his phone had lost signal completely. The Cornerstone Youth Leadership Academy sat at the end of that gravel road. It had been a summer camp once. I could see the bones of it. A cluster of wooden buildings around a central lodge. A flagpole. Fire pit rings. A dining hall with a mural painted on the outside. Faded kids holding hands under a rainbow that had mostly weathered to pink and gray. It was a Wednesday afternoon, school hours, theoretically. There were no kids visible anywhere near the buildings. Greg parked in the gravel lot. A woman came out of the lodge before we'd even opened the doors. She was maybe 50, wearing a fleece vest with a Cornerstone logo on it, and she had the particular smile of someone who practices it. "Gentlemen, do you have an appointment?" "I'm Marcus Webb's father. I want to see my son." Her smile held. "Of course, we do ask that family visits be scheduled in advance. The boys are in their afternoon work rotation right now, and disruptions to the schedule." "Work rotation." She paused just barely. "Life skills training. The boys learn practical skills as part of their character development curriculum. Responsibility, follow-through. Where?" She blinked. "I'm sorry? Where is the work rotation? Which direction?" She glanced at Greg like he might be more manageable. "Sir, if you'll just come inside, I can contact Director Halverson and we can—" I was already walking. She called something after me, but I didn't turn around. I heard Greg say something to her in a low voice, the kind of voice he used when he was trying to keep a situation from escalating, and then I heard his boots on the gravel behind me. The main building blocked a view of whatever was behind it. I went around the east side, past a woodpile that was too big for just heating a lodge, past a storage building with a padlocked door. The ground sloped down toward a tree line about 200 yards out. That's where I saw them. There were maybe a dozen boys in the field. They were clearing brush, dragging cut branches to a pile, working with loppers and handsaws on the scrub growth along what looked like it had once been a fence line. The temperature was 34 degrees. Most of them were in jeans and hooded sweatshirts. One of them, smaller than the others, was wearing what looked like a single layer under his hood, and he was dragging a branch twice his size through the frozen mud. I knew the way he moved before I saw his face. Marcus got his walk from me. Slightly turned out left foot, a thing I've had since I broke my ankle at 19. His mother used to tease me about it. Marcus had picked it up the way kids pick things up without knowing it, and watching him struggle through that mud, I felt something go through me that I don't have a word for. Not anger. Not yet. Something that came before anger when the thing happening in front of you is so wrong that your brain takes a second to accept it as real. I was in that field before I decided to move. A man in a canvas jacket with a clipboard turned when he heard my boots on the frozen ground. He was young, late 20s, with a kind of confidence that comes from never having been wrong yet. This is a restricted program area. You'll need to. That's my son. Sir, Marcus had looked up. His face did something complicated. Surprise first, then relief, then something that broke me to see on an 11-year-old's face, a kind of desperate hope that looked like it had been waiting a long time to have somewhere to land. Dad. He dropped the branch. Hey, buddy. He ran. I caught him and he hit me hard enough that I had to step back and he didn't let go. He was shaking. I thought at first it was the cold, but it wasn't the cold, or it wasn't only the cold. I've got you, I told him. I've got you. His voice was muffled against my shoulder. I thought you weren't getting out until March. Storm came in early, I said. It was the first thing I thought of. The man with the clipboard had his phone out. I need you to put the child down and come with me to the main office. He's my son. Sir, he's a minor enrolled in this program and his legal guardian is. I looked at the other boys. They'd stopped working. They were watching us with expressions I recognized. Not hope exactly, but the memory of hope. The way you look at something you've stopped letting yourself want. One of them, a tall kid, maybe 13, had a cut on his hand that had been wrapped in what looked like a piece of torn t-shirt. I looked at the man with the clipboard. I looked at the frozen field. I looked at my son's face, chapped and too thin, his lips cracked at the corners the way skin cracks when you're outside in the cold more than you're inside in the warm. How long has he been doing this? I asked it quietly. Sir, the program involves structured outdoor work as a component of every day. The clipboard man's jaw tightened. I'm calling Director Halverson. You do that. Director Halverson was a big man, maybe 60, with white hair and the kind of easy authority that gets built up over years of people not questioning him. He came down the slope from the lodge like he owned the ground under his feet, which I supposed he did. Mr. Webb. He said it like he was being magnanimous just by knowing my name. I understand you're concerned. It's completely natural when a parent hasn't been involved in a child's life for an extended period. I've been in federal prison. I looked at him steady. I know where I've been. Where has my son been? Marcus is thriving in our program. His mother specifically chose Cornerstone because Marcus was exhibiting some challenging behaviors, defiance, poor school performance, difficulty with authority figures. Given your family situation, that's understandable. What Marcus needs is structure, and we provide that, in a frozen field. Outdoor labor builds character. He said it like he'd said it 1,000 times. Like it was something he'd decided was true so long ago he'd forgotten deciding it. Show me where he sleeps. Halverson smiled. Visiting hours are Saturdays, 10 to noon, by appointment. If you'd like to schedule, right now. Show me right now. That's not possible. Marcus was still holding my arm. He hadn't let go since he'd reached me. I could feel him not breathing right. I looked at Halverson. I looked at the woman in the fleece vest who'd come down from the lodge. I looked at the clipboard man and the 2 other men who'd appeared from somewhere, standing at an angle that wasn't accidental. I had $40 in my pocket. I had the clothes I'd walked out of Leavenworth in. I had 3 years of being told what I could and couldn't do by people with authority over me, and I was done. I'm leaving with my son. Halverson's voice changed. His legal guardian has placed him in our care through a formal agreement. If you remove him, I will contact the authorities, and given your recent history, Mr. Webb, I don't think that's a situation you want to be in." He let that sit there. Recent history. 3 years in federal prison. A record. The understanding that any confrontation, any physical altercation, and I was the one who went back. It was a smart play. Greg stepped up beside me. He'd been quiet since we came down the slope. He held out his phone. "I already called the sheriff's department," he said. "They're 20 minutes out." Halverson looked at him. "And I've been recording this whole conversation," Greg said, "including the part where you implied his prior incarceration should prevent him from recovering his child from an unlicensed work program." He said it so calmly. Greg, who I'd always thought of as my loud, opinionated brother-in-law, who'd driven 4 hours to pick me up from prison without being asked. Halverson's composure slipped. Just slightly. Just enough. We waited. The deputy who arrived was named Carver, mid-40s, the kind of county officer who'd seen enough that she didn't default to whoever looked most official. She looked at Halverson. She looked at me. She looked at Marcus, still pressed against my side. She asked Marcus directly, "You want to be here?" Marcus shook his head. She looked at his cracked lips, his chapped hands, the other boys still standing in the frozen field 50 yards away. She got on her radio. What happened over the next 3 hours was slow and cold and bureaucratic, but it happened. A second deputy arrived. Then a woman from the Division of Family Services who asked questions in a voice so deliberately calm it was its own kind of authority. Then a state trooper who'd apparently had Cornerstone on a watch list for 8 months following a complaint from a family in Joplin. Halverson tried cooperative for about an hour. Then his staff started getting nervous. One of them tried to leave in a truck, and the deputy blocked the drive. They found the bunkhouse. 14 boys, ages 9 to 15. 4 bunk beds to a room, a single bathroom for all of them. A whiteboard on the wall with a schedule that started at 5:30 a.m. and ended at 9 p.m. with what was labeled free time, but was actually what the boys told investigators was mandatory journaling about their moral failures. Marcus hadn't been allowed to call me. He'd known in the abstract that I was in Leavenworth, that my release date was March. He'd written me 2 letters that he later told me were read by staff before being mailed. Neither had reached me. He'd stopped writing after the second one. He thought, and this is the part that I've gone over in my head more times than anything else, he thought I hadn't answered because I decided he wasn't worth the trouble, that I'd chosen the situation I was in over reaching back. They had told him that, not directly, but in the way Director Halverson had of explaining things. "Your father has his own struggles, Marcus. People in difficult situations sometimes have to make hard choices about their priorities. We're here for you. Cornerstone is your family now, 11 years old, and they'd taken the one thing I'd been holding on to for 3 years, the belief that my son knew I was coming back, and they'd quietly dismantled it." I sat in Greg's truck with Marcus while the deputies processed the scene. A paramedic came to check the boys. Marcus had lost 12 pounds since November. He had 2 fingers on his left hand that he jammed on a fence post that hadn't been looked at by anyone with medical training. The skin had healed wrong. The paramedic said he should go to the urgent care in Sedalia. Marcus looked at me. "I'm not going without you," he said. "I'll drive behind," I told him. "I won't leave your sight." Diane came to the hospital. She looked like someone had knocked the air out of her, pale, eyes red, moving carefully like she didn't trust her own legs. "I didn't know," she said. She said it to me first, then to Marcus, who turned away from her and looked at the wall. I wanted to believe her. For Marcus's sake I tried. The truth that came out later in the investigation was complicated. Diane hadn't known about the work details. She'd believed Cornerstone's literature, which was polished and cited developmental psychology, and showed photographs of boys building things and grinning. She'd met Halverson twice, and he'd been impressive both times. She was a single mother who'd been struggling since the divorce, since my arrest, since the whole architecture of the life she'd built had collapsed, and Cornerstone had offered her something that looked like help. She'd also signed a document that gave the program broad authority over Marcus's schedule, communications, and, in a phrase that a family law attorney later described as deliberately obscured boilerplate, daily activities including educational and vocational training. She hadn't read it carefully enough. She'd wanted so badly for something to work. That's not an excuse, but it's the shape of how these things happen. The people who run programs like Cornerstone don't find negligent parents. They find exhausted ones. Halverson was charged with 12 counts, including child labor violations, operating an unlicensed residential facility, and fraud. 4 staff members were charged alongside him. 2 of them took plea deals and testified that the cotton fieldwork detail at a different Cornerstone location in Arkansas, I hadn't known there was a second location, had been operating for 3 years before anyone looked at it. The Arkansas program was worse. I won't describe it beyond that. Diane was not charged, but she lost custody. Marcus came to live with me, first in Greg's spare room while I found work, then in a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbia that cost more than I thought I could manage. I figured it out. I got a job with a construction crew through a contractor who'd known me before Leavenworth and didn't pretend the years in between hadn't happened. I worked 6 days a week. I was home every night. Marcus didn't talk much the first month. He ate everything on his plate and then sometimes looked at me like he expected me to take it away. He slept with the door open. He'd learned at Cornerstone to ask permission before doing basic things, getting a glass of water, turning on the TV. And when I told him he didn't have to ask, he kept asking anyway for weeks. Habits from that kind of place don't leave quickly. His school in Columbia tested him and found he was behind in math. He'd missed a significant amount of classroom instruction while at Cornerstone, which used academic sessions as reward or withheld them as discipline. He caught up over the next year and a half, but that first fall he struggled, and I sat with him at the kitchen table every night working through the parts he'd missed. What helped him most, I think, wasn't anything I did strategically. It was just the accumulation of ordinary days, dinner at the same time, the same route to school, the fact that I was there in the morning and there in the evening and there on weekends. After 3 years of inconsistency and 7 weeks of structured unpredictability, ordinary days were what he needed most. He had a therapist named Dr. Kane, Okafor, who specialized in institutional trauma. Marcus hated going at first. Then he hated it less. Then one evening he mentioned something Dr. Okafor had said, casually, the way kids mention things, and I understood that it had started to mean something. He didn't draw, like Emma in that other story. Marcus had always been into building things, Legos, model kits, anything with instructions and small pieces. At Cornerstone they'd taken those away. Too much distraction, Halverson had said. For the first 2 months at my apartment, Marcus didn't touch anything like that. He watched TV. He slept. He ate. Then I came home from work one afternoon and found him at the kitchen table with a model kit I'd bought and left on his shelf without saying anything about it. He'd opened it himself. He was sorting the pieces into categories with a focus I recognized from when he was 6 and could spend 3 hours on a single project. He didn't look up. He just said, "Dad, we don't have the right glue for this." We went to the hobby shop together. He talked the whole way there about the kit, about the scale, about some modification he wanted to make to the wing design. It was the first time he'd talked that much about anything since I brought him home. I drove with the windows down a little, even though it was cold, just to make sure I was feeling the air on my face, just to make sure I was awake for it. Halverson's trial lasted 8 days. I testified on the 3rd day. I'd been told by the prosecutor what to expect, and it didn't matter. Sitting across the room from him while his defense attorney tried to suggest that my criminal record made me an unreliable witness, watching him maintain that practiced composure was one of the harder things I've done. Marcus didn't testify in person. His statement was submitted through Dr. Turner, Okafor's office. That was the right call. Halverson got 22 years on the federal labor trafficking charge. His 3 senior staff members got sentences ranging from 7 to 15 years. The Arkansas location's director got 31 years because of what they found there. The civil case ran parallel. The families of the 14 boys at the Missouri site brought a class action. I wasn't part of it, partly because my attorney advised against it, partly because I didn't want Marcus to go through anything more than he had to. Some of the other families settled. A few went to trial. The judgment, when it came, was significant enough that it bankrupted the Cornerstone Foundation entirely. which meant it was significant. Diane got supervised visitation with Marcus, twice monthly. The first visit was stiff and uncomfortable. Marcus came home quiet. Over time, it got easier, the way hard things sometimes do when there's no alternative but to work through them. He was never going to live with her again. But she was still his mother, and Marcus, once he processed enough in therapy to separate what she'd done from who she was, found his own way to some version of forgiveness. Not for her sake, for his. I don't know what I feel about Diane. I go back and forth. I know she was trying. I know she loved Marcus. I know that the architecture of Cornerstone was specifically designed to make concerned parents feel their children were safe. I also know that Marcus wrote her 2 letters she was told about, and she didn't call the facility to find out why he'd stopped writing. There's a version of grief in that knowledge that I've learned to set aside most of the time. 2 years after the trial, Marcus was 13 and building a 1048 scale replica of a Wright brothers biplane from scratch. Not from a kit. From plans he'd found online and modified himself. It took him 4 months. When it was done, he entered it in a regional STEM competition at his school. He won 2nd place. The 1st place entry was a working model of a water filtration system built by a kid whose mother was an engineer, and Marcus said, completely without bitterness, that it was fair. That's how he said it. Completely without bitterness, not performing grace, just actually having it. I framed the 2nd place certificate and put it on the wall of our apartment. Marcus told me it was embarrassing and also did not tell me to take it down. He was in 8th grade by then, taller than me by half an inch, a fact he mentioned regularly. He had 2 close friends from school, a kid named Devin who was also into model building, and a girl named Priya, who Marcus insisted was just his friend and whose name he brought up approximately 4 times per conversation. He had nightmares sometimes, less often than before. He still slept with the door open. He'd started asking about my time in Leavenworth. Not the way he'd asked when he was 8, when the facts of it were too large and abstract for either of us to talk about clearly. Asking in the specific way of a kid who's processing something complicated and has decided to do it directly. What was it like, he asked one night. Like being told what to do every minute of every day by people who had power over you, I said, and counting time. He was quiet for a second. That's kind of what Cornerstone was like. Yeah, I know. He looked at the biplane on his shelf. Did you ever think I'd forgotten about you? I had to be careful with this one. I thought sometimes that you might be moving on, living your life. I told myself that was good, even if it hurt. I didn't, he said. I didn't forget about you. I just stopped thinking you were coming back. That's different from forgetting. Yeah, he'd worked that out himself, I think. The distinction between the two. I was glad he had. I started volunteering with a re-entry organization in Colombia about a year after I got out. They worked with formerly incarcerated men on job skills and legal resources, but increasingly they'd gotten questions from participants whose children had been placed in programs while the fathers were inside. Cornerstone had not been the only one. There were others, less extreme but operating on the same logic, targeting the families of incarcerated men and women who had limited ability to oversee what was happening. I gave talks sometimes about what to look for, about the specific language these programs use. Words like thriving and structure and accountability and life skills. Words that mean something real in other contexts and mean something weaponized in these ones. I talked about the things I'd failed to do, the questions I hadn't asked because I'd been relieved someone was taking care of Marcus while I couldn't. The trust I'd extended to Diane without a system for verification because I'd felt too guilty about where I was to push back. I'm not telling this part to make myself sound like I learned a lesson cleanly. I didn't. I made other mistakes after. I still do. But I started to understand that the specific vulnerability these programs exploit is the vulnerability of people who are already ashamed, who already believe on some level that they deserve less, that their children deserve less, that someone with credentials and a nice brochure knows better than they do what their child needs. They count on that. They built the whole thing on it. The thing you have to keep returning to, the only weapon that actually works, is the insistence that you know your child. Not perfectly, not completely, but you know them. You know what their face looks like when something is wrong. You know the specific way they move, the turned-out ankle, the way they hold their shoulders when they're tired. You know the difference between a kid who is thriving and a kid who has learned to perform it. Trust that knowing, even from the inside of a situation where everyone with authority is telling you you're wrong. Trust it. On the second anniversary of bringing Marcus home, we drove out to Benton County. The camp had been purchased by the county and converted into an actual park. Hiking trails, a picnic area, some improvements to the old fire rings. The bunkhouse had been torn down. The lodge was still standing and used for ranger storage. We parked in the same gravel lot where Greg had parked his truck that January afternoon. The ground that had been frozen mud was summer grass now. The scrub growth along the fence line that Marcus and those other boys had spent their days clearing was coming back, green and undirected. Marcus walked down toward where the work area had been. I followed. He stood there looking at it for a while. "It's smaller than I remembered," he said. "Trauma does that," I told him. "Makes things feel bigger while you're in it." He nodded. He had his hands in his pockets. He was taller than me by 1.5 inches by then. I'd lost the half-inch lead in the winter. "Do you ever think about the other guys?" he asked. "Derek and those kids?" "All the time." He'd maintained contact with 2 of the boys from the program. Derek was 15 by then, doing well, living with his grandmother in St. Louis. A younger boy named Caleb had taken longer to stabilize. Marcus mentioned him sometimes in the way you mention someone you're holding space for without being able to do much. "I think about Derek," Marcus said, "about what would have happened if you'd come in March instead of January." "I know. That's 6 more weeks." "I know." He turned and started walking back toward the car. Then he stopped. "Hey, Dad, you know that document thing they're always saying in school? About how every citizen has the right to petition?" "First Amendment," I said. "Right to petition the government." "Yeah." He thought about it. "We should be able to petition for more furlough days, for dads who are inside and have kids, like emergency check-ins or something. So this can't happen." He said it practically the way he said most things. Not idealistic, not angry. Like it was a gap in a process that obviously needed to be fixed. I looked at him. He was already moving toward the car, done with the idea for now, ready to go get lunch. He'd said it the way you say a thing you expect to return to later. "You should write that down," I told him. He shrugged. "I will." He probably would. That was the thing about Marcus, he followed through. Even on the big things, even on the things that had reasons not to. We got back in the car. He plugged his phone into the aux cord without asking, which he'd stopped asking about months ago, and put on something I didn't recognize that he explained was a producer from Atlanta who was doing interesting things with samples. I nodded like I knew what that meant. We drove north through the hill country with the windows half down, the way we'd started doing on drives, and I watched the land flatten out as we got closer to the highway. And I thought about all the ordinary days that had accumulated between that frozen January and this warm July. The model kits on the kitchen table and the STEM fair and the therapy appointments and the dinners at the same time every night. I hadn't been there for 3 years. That's real, and it doesn't go away. But I'd been there since, and being there since is not nothing. I've had to learn that the way you learn things that don't come naturally by repeating it until it holds. Marcus was drumming lightly on his knee. He glanced over. "You good?" "I'm good," I said. He nodded and turned back to the window. We drove for a while in the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. That's a thing you have to earn with your kid. Not the silence exactly, but the trust underneath it. The understanding that being in the same space without talking is still being together. That presence doesn't always need to be loud to count. We're still earning it, both of us, in different ways. We probably always will be. But he's in the passenger seat, and I'm driving. And nobody is taking that. I've thought a lot about the chain of decisions that led to that frozen field in Benton County. Not just Halverson's decisions, or Diane's, or mine. The whole chain. Because that's the thing nobody wants to sit with. It's never one person who lets something like this happen. It's a sequence. And somewhere in that sequence, almost always, there's a moment where someone chose not to ask the hard question, because asking it would have meant admitting something uncomfortable about themselves. I was that person too. I want to be honest about that. I'd been so relieved that Marcus had somewhere stable to go while I was inside that I'd stopped paying attention to whether stable was actually the right word for it. I told myself that Diane had it handled, that my job was to get through my time and come out clean and start over. And underneath all of that was something I didn't want to name, which was shame. The shame of a man who'd put himself in a situation where he couldn't protect his own kid. And shame, I've learned, is the enemy of clear thinking. It makes you accept things you shouldn't accept, because questioning them means looking directly at the gap between who you are and who you meant to be. Halverson built his whole operation on that gap, not just mine. Every parent who sent a child to Cornerstone was carrying some version of it. Exhaustion, poverty, the particular helplessness of being a single parent in a system that offers almost no real support. He found people at their lowest point of self-trust and handed them a brochure that said someone else knew better. That's not an accident, that's a design. What I try to pass on now when I talk to other men coming out of reentry programs is something simple. You still know your kid. Whatever you've been through, whatever you've done, that knowing doesn't expire. The way Marcus moved through that field, the turned-out left foot, his mother's walk that he'd picked up without knowing it, I recognized that from 200 yards away. Nobody with a clipboard and a fleece vest and a Cornerstone logo was ever going to know my son that way. I just had to trust what I knew instead of deferring to what looked official. Marcus figured something out that I'm still working on. He understood earlier than most adults do that what happened to him wasn't the whole of what he was. He picked up the model kit. He went back to school. He made friends. He built a biplane from scratch, plans he found online, and modified himself, because that's who he is. Someone who looks at a set of instructions and immediately starts thinking about what could be different. That didn't come from me, and it didn't come from therapy, though therapy helped. It came from him. From something in him that Cornerstone tried to methodically dismantle and couldn't quite reach. Resilience isn't a personality trait you're born with. I don't believe that anymore. I think it's a practice. It's the accumulation of small decisions to keep going when stopping would be easier. Marcus made those decisions at 11 in a frozen field in Missouri every morning when he got up and kept moving. I made them in Leavenworth for 3 years. Neither of us did it perfectly. Both of us did it enough. The field in Benton County has sunflowers now. I don't know that for a fact, but I like to think so. What I do know is that Marcus is in the passenger seat, drumming on his knee, telling me about a producer from Atlanta who does something interesting with samples. And I'm driving, and we've got nowhere urgent to be. That's what it cost to get here. And it was worth every hard mile of it.